The cursor blinked mockingly on the empty page as Kayla Morrison stared at her laptop screen in the cramped corner of her childhood bedroom. At 26, she was back living with her parents in suburban Cleveland, Ohio, surrounded by the same floral wallpaper and participation trophies that had witnessed her teenage dreams of becoming a published author. The rejection letter from Penguin Random House still sat open in another browser tab, its polite but devastating words seared into her memory. While your manuscript shows creative merit, it does not align with our current publishing objectives. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. It was rejection number 43 in 8 months. 43 publishers, agents, and literary magazines that had deemed her debut novel, The Forgotten Symphony, unworthy of their attention. Each rejection felt like a small death, chipping away at the confidence she'd spent years building through late-night writing sessions and weekend workshops at the local community center. Downstairs, she could hear her family gathering for their weekly Sunday dinner, the familiar sounds of clinking dishes and animated conversation drifting up through the thin walls. Her younger brother Jake's booming laughter echoed through the house as he regaled everyone with stories from his latest promotion at the insurance firm. Her sister Emma was probably showing off photos from her recent real estate closings, each successful sale adding another zero to her growing bank account. Kayla had been avoiding these family dinners for weeks, knowing they'd inevitably turn to the uncomfortable topic of her hobby, and when she planned to get a real job. Her savings from her previous position as a marketing coordinator had dwindled to dangerous levels, and her parents' patience was wearing thin with each passing month of unemployment that she insisted on calling her writing sabbatical. The smell of her mother's famous pot roast wafted up the stairs, accompanied by her father's voice calling her name. Kayla, dinner's ready. Come join the living world down here. She closed the laptop with more force than necessary and trudged downstairs to face the inevitable interrogation disguised as family concern. The Morrison family dining room had barely changed since her high school graduation 8 years ago. The same mahogany table that had witnessed countless homework sessions, the same china cabinet displaying her mother's collection of ceramic figurines, and the same uncomfortable chairs that seemed designed to make family meals feel like board meetings. Her parents, Richard and Susan Morrison, were the epitome of middle-class stability. Her father had worked for 30 years at the same accounting firm, climbing methodically from junior associate to partner through sheer persistence and an unwavering belief in the value of steady employment. Her mother had taught elementary school for 2 decades before retiring early to focus on her garden club and book club, though Kayla suspected the books they discussed were more romance novels than literary fiction. Jake, 24 and already earning more than most of his college friends, represented everything her parents valued: ambition channeled into practical pursuits, financial independence, and a clear trajectory toward conventional success. Emma, 28 and the family's undisputed golden child, had purchased her first investment property at 25 and never missed an opportunity to discuss her growing real estate portfolio. Then there was Kayla, the middle child who had always marched to her own drummer, much to her family's bewilderment. While her siblings had chosen majors that led directly to lucrative careers, she'd studied English literature with a minor in creative writing, choices that had prompted years of worried conversations about her future prospects. As she entered the dining room, the conversation halted with the subtlety of a record scratch. Her mother's smile was warm but tinged with the kind of concern usually reserved for terminal diagnoses. Her father looked up from carving the roast with an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else in the world than having another conversation about his daughter's impractical dreams. There she is, Susan said brightly, ladling mashed potatoes onto everyone's plates with the efficiency of someone who'd been feeding a family for 3 decades. We were just talking about the Henderson's son. Remember Tommy from down the street? He just got promoted to regional sales manager at that pharmaceutical company. Such a success story. Kayla settled into her designated chair, the same one she'd occupied since childhood, between Jake and Emma. The seating arrangement felt like a metaphor for her position in the family hierarchy, literally and figuratively stuck in the middle, overshadowed by her siblings' more tangible achievements. That's great for Tommy, Kayla replied, reaching for the green beans and trying to keep her voice neutral. She knew where this conversation was heading, could see it approaching like a storm cloud on the horizon. You know, sweetheart, Richard began, setting down his carving knife with the deliberate care of someone about to deliver an uncomfortable truth. Your mother and I have been talking, and we're concerned about your future. It's been 8 months since you left your marketing job, and while we admire your dedication to your writing, we think it might be time to consider a more practical approach. The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Kayla had been dreading this moment, knowing it would come eventually but hoping she could delay it until she had something concrete to show for her efforts. A book deal, a literary agent, even a short story publication in a respectable magazine would have been enough ammunition to defend her choices. Dad, I know it seems like I'm not making progress, but publishing is incredibly competitive. Most authors get dozens of rejections before they find the right fit. Stephen King's first novel was rejected 30 times before it was finally published. Emma looked up from her phone, where she'd been scrolling through what appeared to be real estate listings. Kayla, no offense, but you're not Stephen King. He had something special that publishers could recognize. Maybe the rejections are trying to tell you something. The comment stung more than Kayla cared to admit, partly because it echoed her own growing fears about her talent and prospects. She'd always been the writer in the family, the one who won essay contests in high school and had her short stories published in the college literary magazine. But the transition from small pond success to the vast ocean of professional publishing had been more brutal than she'd anticipated. Writing is a wonderful hobby, Susan interjected, her voice gentle but firm. But hobbies don't pay bills or build retirement funds. Your father and I won't be able to support you indefinitely, and we're worried about what happens when you're 35 and still waiting for your big break. Jake, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the exchange, finally spoke up. Look, sis, I get that you're passionate about this stuff, but have you considered that maybe you could write on the side while building a real career? I know tons of people who have creative outlets but also have stable jobs. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. The suggestion felt like a betrayal from her closest sibling, the one person in the family she'd always counted on for support. Jake had been her confidant during their teenage years, the only one who'd read her early stories without immediately suggesting she consider more practical pursuits. His gradual transformation into another voice of conventional wisdom felt like losing an ally in enemy territory. You all act like I'm just sitting in my room doing nothing, Kayla said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. I've written an entire novel. 90,000 words that I've spent 2 years crafting, editing, and polishing. I've researched agents, studied the market, and followed every piece of advice from successful authors about breaking into the industry. And how's that working out for you? Richard asked, his tone sharper than usual. Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you've spent 2 years and our financial support chasing something that isn't realistic. The brutal honesty of his words hit like a physical blow. Kayla had always known her father was skeptical of her artistic ambitions, but he'd never been quite so direct about his disapproval. The family dinner she'd been dreading had become exactly the confrontation she'd feared. Your cousin Michelle just got her master's degree in business administration, Susan added, apparently unaware that she was piling onto an already defeated opponent. She's looking at management positions that start at $60,000 a year. With benefits and a pension plan. That's security, honey. That's a future you can plan around. I don't want Michelle's life, Kayla said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've wanted to be a writer since I was 12 years old. This isn't some quarter-life crisis or phase I'm going through. It's who I am. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma returned to her phone, Jake focused intently on his dinner, and her parents exchanged the kind of meaningful look that had been perfected over 30 years of marriage. It was the look that said they'd discussed this situation extensively in private and had reached a unanimous conclusion about their daughter's future. Kayla, Richard said finally, his voice softer but no less resolute. We love you, and we want you to be happy. But happiness without financial security is just delayed misery. You're 26 years old, living in your childhood bedroom, with no steady income and no concrete prospects. At what point do you admit that maybe this dream isn't going to happen? The question hit its intended target with devastating accuracy. Kayla had been asking herself the same thing with increasing frequency, especially during the dark hours between midnight and dawn when doubt crept in like fog through an open window. The rational part of her brain knew her father was right. The statistics were grim for aspiring novelists, and she'd already beaten the odds by finishing a complete manuscript. Most people who claimed they wanted to write a book never made it past chapter 3. But the creative part of her soul, the part that had been writing stories since she could hold a pencil, rebelled against the notion of surrender. Every great author had faced rejection and doubt. Every literary success story began with someone refusing to give up despite the odds. The question wasn't whether she had talent, she knew she did. The question was whether she had the resilience to outlast the rejection cycle long enough for the right person to recognize that talent. I need more time, she said finally, the words feeling inadequate even as she spoke them. Just 6 more months. If I can't get an agent or a publishing deal by then, I'll start looking for regular employment. Her parents exchanged another look, this one tinged with exhaustion and resignation. They'd been having variations of this conversation for months, and everyone at the table knew that 6 months was just another arbitrary deadline that would likely be extended when it arrived. "Kayla," Susan said, reaching across the table to take her daughter's hand. "We're not trying to crush your dreams. We just want you to be realistic about your options. Maybe you could look into technical writing or content marketing. Those are writing jobs that pay well and use your skills." The suggestion felt like being offered a job cleaning paintbrushes at the Louvre when you dreamed of being Picasso. Technical writing and content marketing were respectable careers, but they weren't why she'd spent her childhood filling notebooks with stories about brave heroines and impossible adventures. They weren't why she'd stayed up until 3 a.m. for months, crafting scenes and dialogue that made her heart race with excitement. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. As dinner continued around topics that carefully avoided her career prospects, Kayla retreated into the mental space she'd occupied throughout her childhood, the observer role that allowed her to study family dynamics while remaining emotionally detached. She watched Emma dominate the conversation with real estate success stories, noticed how Jake's insurance anecdotes received enthusiastic responses, and observed her parents' genuine pride in their practical children's achievements. She was the family outlier, the creative dreamer in a household of pragmatists, the person who saw magic in words while everyone else saw only impracticality. The isolation was familiar but no less painful for its predictability. She'd spent her entire life feeling like a square peg being forced into round holes, and tonight's dinner was just another reminder that her family couldn't understand her choices because they couldn't understand her fundamental nature. After helping with dishes and enduring another round of gentle suggestions about backup plans and realistic timelines, Kayla retreated to her room and opened her laptop once again. The cursor still blinked on the empty page, but now it felt less like mockery and more like possibility. Tomorrow she would start submitting to smaller publishers, literary journals, and independent agents who might be more willing to take risks on unknown authors. Her phone buzzed with a text from her college roommate and fellow English major, Sarah, who was working as an editorial assistant at a publishing house in New York. "How did the family dinner go? Are you still planning to conquer the literary world, or have they convinced you to become an accountant like your dad?" Kayla smiled despite herself as she typed back, "Still planning world conquest. Rome wasn't built in a day, and apparently, novels aren't published in 8 months. But I'm not giving up yet." "Good," came Sarah's immediate reply. "The world needs more authentic voices, not more people doing jobs they hate because they're practical. Keep writing, keep submitting, and keep believing in your work. The right person will recognize your talent when the timing is right." 3 weeks after the disastrous family dinner, Kayla discovered the Highland Writers' Conference through a crumpled flyer tucked between the pages of a used writing craft book she'd purchased from the local bookstore. The conference was being held in Portland, Maine, just 2 hours from her childhood home, featuring workshops on genre fiction, literary agents, and the changing landscape of modern publishing. What caught her attention wasn't the impressive lineup of workshop leaders or the networking opportunities, but a single line buried in the small print at the bottom of the brochure: special guest appearance by renowned author Stephen King for Saturday evening keynote address. The registration fee was $250 she couldn't afford, plus hotel and travel expenses that would drain what remained of her emergency fund. Her practical mind immediately began calculating the financial impossibility of attending, but something deeper than logic urged her forward. This wasn't just another writers' conference with recycled advice from mid-level authors and literary agents looking for the next big thing. This was a chance to be in the same room as her literary hero, the man whose journey from rejection to worldwide success had sustained her through countless dark nights of doubt. Stephen King's story had become her personal mythology during the worst moments of her writing career. She'd read every interview about his early struggles, memorized the details of how Carrie had been rescued from his trash can by his wife Tabitha, and found comfort in knowing that even the master of modern horror had once been an unknown teacher, living paycheck to paycheck while pursuing his impossible dream of becoming a professional writer. If Stephen King could survive 30 rejections and go on to publish over 60 novels, surely she could endure 43 rejections and continue fighting for her own literary future. The decision to attend the conference meant having an uncomfortable conversation with her parents about borrowing money, a prospect that made her stomach churn with anticipated humiliation. She'd already been living rent-free in their house for 8 months, contributing only occasionally to groceries and utilities. When her freelance writing gigs provided enough income, asking for additional financial support to attend what they would undoubtedly view as an expensive vacation disguised as a professional development opportunity felt like confirming every criticism they'd leveled at her impractical choices. She Found her father in his home office on a Tuesday evening, surrounded by tax documents and financial spreadsheets that represented the kind of organized, predictable career she'd rejected in favor of artistic uncertainty. Richard Morrison looked up from his computer with the weary expression of a man who'd spent decades solving other people's financial problems and had developed an instinctive wariness of requests that began with, "I know this might sound crazy. But, Dad, I wanted to talk to you about something," Kayla began, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "There's a writers' conference in Maine next month that could be really important for my career. It's not just workshops and networking, Stephen King is giving the keynote address." Her father's expression shifted from weariness to skepticism as he processed the implied request. "And how much does this career opportunity cost?" "The registration is $250, plus maybe another $300 for hotel and gas." The words came out in a rush, as if speaking them quickly would somehow minimize their financial impact. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter with the analytical gaze that had made him successful in his accounting practice. "Kayla, we've had this conversation before. You're asking us to invest more money in something that hasn't shown any return on investment. How is going to this conference different from the dozens of online workshops and writing courses you've already taken?" The question stung because it forced her to articulate something she'd been feeling but couldn't quite express, that her writing career had reached a critical juncture where she needed either a breakthrough or a graceful exit strategy. The conference represented more than just educational workshops and networking opportunities. It was a pilgrimage to the spiritual center of her chosen profession, a chance to commune with other people who understood that writing wasn't just a career choice but a calling that transcended rational decision-making. "It's different because Stephen King will be there," she said, knowing how naive the words sounded even as she spoke them. "I know that sounds starstruck, but he's not just a celebrity to me. He's proof that ordinary people from working-class backgrounds can succeed in publishing without connections or privilege. His presence validates everything I'm trying to accomplish." Her father's expression softened slightly, recognizing the desperation beneath his daughter's rationalization. "Honey, I understand that this man means something to you, but paying $500 to sit in an audience and listen to someone talk isn't going to magically solve your publishing problems. Success comes from hard work and smart decisions, not from inspirational speeches." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Richard eventually agreeing to loan her the money with the understanding that it would be deducted from any future financial support. The transaction felt less like parental assistance and more like a business deal between a skeptical investor and a risky startup, complete with implied expectations about return on investment and timeline for profitability. Her mother's reaction was more emotionally complex, mixing maternal concern with frustrated bewilderment at her daughter's continued pursuit of an increasingly quixotic dream. Susan Morrison had spent her entire adult life making practical choices, sacrificing personal desires for family stability, and watching her daughter choose passion over security felt like witnessing someone deliberately walk into traffic while insisting they knew what they were doing. "I just don't understand why you can't write as a hobby while building a stable career," Susan said during one of their kitchen conversations that had become a regular feature of Kayla's unemployment. "Your great-aunt Margaret wrote poetry for 50 years while working as a librarian. She never expected her poems to pay the bills, but she found fulfillment in the creative process." The comparison to Great-Aunt Margaret, a spinster who'd lived alone with her cats and self-published chapbooks that sold primarily to family members, felt like a glimpse into a possible future that terrified Kayla more than financial insecurity. She didn't want to be the family's eccentric creative, the person whose artistic pursuits were tolerated as harmless eccentricity rather than respected as legitimate professional ambitions. The drive to Portland took her through small New England towns that looked like settings from Stephen King novels, complete with weathered churches, abandoned mills, and forests that seemed to harbor dark secrets. She'd borrowed her mother's Honda Civic for the trip, and the familiar smell of vanilla air freshener mixed with years of family road trips created an oddly comforting atmosphere for her pilgrimage to meet her literary hero. She'd booked a room at a modest hotel near the conference center, splurging on a private room instead of sharing accommodations with strangers because she needed space to process what she hoped would be a transformative experience. The Highland Writers' Conference was being held at a restored 19th-century resort that had hosted countless literary events over the decades, and walking through its wood-paneled halls felt like entering a sacred space where important conversations about art and commerce had been conducted for generations. The conference attracted exactly the demographic she'd expected: aspiring writers of various ages and experience levels, published authors promoting their latest works, literary agents scouting for new talent, and industry professionals who made their living helping others navigate the complex world of modern publishing. She recognized the familiar mixture of hope and desperation in the faces around her, the same expression she'd seen in bathroom mirrors during her lowest moments of self-doubt. Friday's workshops covered familiar territory about craft, market, research, and submission strategies, but Kayla found herself distracted by anticipation for Saturday evening's keynote address. She attended sessions on dialogue techniques and character development, took diligent notes on query letter construction and platform building, and participated in networking sessions that felt like speed dating for literary professionals. Each interaction carried the possibility of being the connection that would finally open doors to her publishing dreams. During lunch on Saturday, she overheard a conversation between two literary agents discussing the current state of the fiction market, their casual mention of seven-figure advances and bidding wars for debut novels creating both excitement and intimidation. These were the gatekeepers she'd been trying to impress for months, and seeing them as actual people rather than mysterious entities behind rejection letters made the publishing industry feel simultaneously more accessible and more daunting. The Saturday evening keynote was scheduled for 7 o'clock in the resort's main ballroom, and Kayla arrived 30 minutes early to secure a seat near the front. The ballroom gradually filled with conference attendees, local writers who'd purchased single-event tickets, and Stephen King fans who'd driven from across New England for the opportunity to hear their favorite author speak in person. The energy in the room felt electric with anticipation, as if everyone present understood they were about to witness something special. When Stephen King took the stage, he looked exactly as Kayla had imagined, tall, slightly rumpled, and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from decades of literary success and financial security. But his opening remarks immediately dispelled any sense of celebrity distance, as he began speaking about his own early struggles with rejection, self-doubt, and the challenge of balancing artistic integrity with commercial viability. I know many of you are here tonight because you're hoping I'll share some magic formula for breaking into publishing, he began, his main accent adding authenticity to words that could have sounded rehearsed from any other speaker. The truth is, there's no secret handshake or hidden pathway to success. There's only persistence, craft improvement, and the willingness to fail repeatedly until you finally don't. For the next hour, King shared stories about his early career that Kayla had never heard before, the job applications he'd filled out while writing Salem's Lot, the financial pressures that had nearly convinced him to abandon writing altogether, and the small victories that had sustained him through years of uncertainty. He spoke candidly about the role luck had played in his success, acknowledging that talent and hard work were necessary but not sufficient conditions for building a sustainable writing career. The publishing industry is simultaneously more democratic and more arbitrary than it's ever been, he continued, his words carrying the weight of 4 decades in the business. Social media has given unknown writers unprecedented access to readers, but it's also created new pressures and distractions that can derail creative focus. The key is remembering that your primary relationship is with the work itself, not with the industry that may or may not choose to embrace it. As the formal presentation concluded, King announced that he would be signing books and meeting attendees in the adjacent reception hall. The line that formed was longer than Kayla had expected, snaking through the ballroom and into the corridor, but she joined it without hesitation, clutching her worn paperback copy of On Writing and trying to formulate the perfect 30-second introduction that would somehow convey her dedication to the craft and her need for encouragement. The wait gave her time to observe King's interactions with other fans, noting his genuine interest in each person's story and his ability to make brief encounters feel meaningful and personal. When her turn finally came, she approached the signing table with her heart pounding and her carefully rehearsed words suddenly evaporating from memory. "What's your name?" King asked, looking up from the book he'd been signing for the previous Pazon in line. "Kayla Morrison," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I've been writing for 8 years, and your advice about persistence has gotten me through 43 rejection letters so far." King's expression shifted slightly, as if her specific number had caught his attention in a way that generic expressions of admiration hadn't. 43? That's a respectable collection. What kind of story are you trying to tell? The question caught her off guard because it wasn't the standard pleasantry she'd expected from a celebrity meet-and-greet situation. He was actually asking about her work, not just making polite conversation while scribbling his signature in her book. She found herself describing The Forgotten Symphony in more detail than she'd planned, explaining the story's themes of artistic struggle and family expectations, its setting in the contemporary classical music world, and her protagonist's journey from self-doubt to authentic creative expression. King listened with the kind of focused attention that made Kayla feel like they were having a private conversation despite the dozens of people still waiting in line behind her. When she finished her impromptu pitch, he was quiet for a moment, apparently considering something before speaking again. "That sounds like a story worth telling," he said finally. And 43 rejections means you're serious about getting it told. Here's what I want you to do: send me the first 3 chapters and a synopsis. Not tonight, not next week, but when you get home and can put together your best possible submission package. He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back before handing it to her along with her signed book. This is my assistant's email address. Tell her I asked you to send your material for my review. I can't promise anything beyond reading it, but if there's something they're worth championing, I'll make sure the right people see it. Kayla stared at the business card as if it might disappear if she looked away, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Stephen King, the Stephen King whose books had sold over 350 million copies worldwide, had just offered to read her unpublished manuscript and potentially help her navigate the publishing industry that had been rejecting her work for months. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the card and signed book against her chest. "This means everything to me." King smiled and nodded toward the next person in line, but not before adding, "Remember, this is still a business where persistence and craft matter more than connections. I'm not offering you a shortcut, I'm offering you a fair reading from someone who knows good storytelling when he sees it. Make sure you earn that opportunity." As Kayla walked away from the signing table, her hands trembling with excitement and disbelief, she realized that everything about her writing career had just changed. The conference that her family had viewed as an expensive indulgence had become the moment when her impossible dream transformed into a genuine possibility. The drive home from Maine felt surreal, as if Kayla were floating through a dream sequence where impossible things had suddenly become possible. Stephen King's business card sat in her cup holder like a talisman, its simple white cardstock representing a doorway to a future she'd barely dared to imagine. Every few miles, she glanced at it to confirm the encounter had actually happened, that she hadn't hallucinated the most important conversation of her writing career during a moment of conference-induced delirium. Her phone had been buzzing intermittently with text messages from Sarah, who'd demanded a complete recap of the keynote address, but Kayla couldn't bring herself to respond while driving. The magnitude of what had occurred felt too precious and fragile to share through casual communication. She needed time to process the experience, to craft the perfect submission package that would justify King's faith in her potential, and to prepare for the inevitable family reactions when she revealed her literary windfall. The Morrison household was unusually quiet when she arrived home Sunday evening, her parents apparently having retired early after what her mother would later describe as a perfectly lovely weekend of normal family activities without any drama or unrealistic expectations. Kayla climbed the stairs to her childhood bedroom, spread Stephen King's contact information across her desk alongside her laptop, and began the most important revision process of her career. She spent the next 3 days meticulously reviewing the opening chapters of The Forgotten Symphony, examining every sentence through the lens of someone who would be reading her work not as a desperate aspiring author but as a potential literary advocate with connections throughout the publishing industry. The pressure was simultaneously exhilarating and paralyzing. This wasn't just another submission to an agent who might spend 30 seconds skimming her query letter before moving on to the next email. This was her one chance to impress someone whose opinion could fundamentally alter the trajectory of her writing career. Her protagonist, Elena Vasquez, a violinist struggling to balance artistic integrity with commercial pressures while navigating family expectations about marriage and financial stability, had originally been inspired by Kayla's own experiences as an artist in a pragmatic family. But now, reading the material with fresh eyes, she recognized opportunities to deepen the character's emotional complexity and strengthen the thematic parallels between musical performance and literary creation. Both art forms required years of dedicated practice, the courage to be vulnerable in front of strangers, and the resilience to continue creating despite criticism and indifference. The revision process consumed her completely, transforming her usual scattered writing routine into a focused intensive that left her temporarily oblivious to family dynamics and external pressures. She worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination while polishing dialogue, tightening scene transitions, and ensuring that every paragraph served both plot advancement and character development. For the first time in months, she felt like a professional writer rather than someone playing at being an author while living in her parents' house. On Thursday morning, her father knocked on her bedroom door with the tentative politeness he'd adopted since their conversation about conference funding. "Kayla? Can I come in? Your mother's worried that you haven't been eating regular meals." She looked up from her laptop, suddenly aware that she'd been wearing the same sweatshirt for 3 days and had survived primarily on granola bars and leftover Chinese takeout. Her father's concerned expression suggested she looked as disheveled as she felt, but the manic energy of productive revision had sustained her through physical discomfort and social isolation. "I'm fine, Dad. Just working on something important." She gestured toward her laptop as if the glowing screen could explain why she'd been hibernating in her room since returning from Maine. Richard Morrison studied his daughter's workspace, noting the scattered papers, empty coffee mugs, and general atmosphere of creative chaos that had overtaken her usually organized environment. Is this related to that conference you attended? Because if you're just rehashing the same material that's already been rejected dozens of times, you might be wasting energy that could be directed toward more productive pursuits. The comment triggered an immediate defensive response that surprised them both with its intensity. I'm not rehashing anything. I'm preparing a submission for someone who actually wants to read my work. Someone who understands what I'm trying to accomplish as a writer. Her father's skepticism was evident in his expression, but he'd learned to recognize the warning signs of conversations that could escalate into family conflicts if pushed too aggressively. That's great, sweetheart. Just remember to take care of yourself while you're pursuing these opportunities. After he left, Kayla realized she hadn't told her family about Stephen King's offer to review her manuscript, partly because she wanted to protect the experience from their inevitable skepticism and partly because she feared jinxing the opportunity by discussing it prematurely. Her parents had spent months expressing doubt about her writing abilities and career prospects. The last thing she needed was their well-meaning but crushing analysis of why meeting a famous author at a conference didn't guarantee publishing success. She decided to wait until after submitting her material to King's assistant before revealing what had happened in Maine. If nothing came of the opportunity, she could avoid the additional layer of family disappointment that would accompany another failed attempt at literary breakthrough. If King's review led to concrete opportunities, she would have tangible proof that her investment in the conference had been justified. The decision to keep the King connection secret created an unexpected side effect. For the first time in months, she felt genuinely excited about her writing career instead of merely determined to prove her family wrong. The external validation from someone whose opinion she respected had restored her confidence in both her talent and her persistence. Even if King's review didn't lead to immediate publishing success, the encounter had reminded her why she'd chosen writing as her profession and renewed her commitment to improving her craft regardless of external outcomes. By Friday evening, she'd completed the revision process and crafted what she hoped was the perfect query letter to accompany her submission. The synopsis had been particularly challenging, requiring her to distill 90,000 words into a compelling 2-page summary that captured both plot mechanics and emotional resonance. She'd written 17 different versions before settling on one that felt both comprehensive and engaging, suitable for someone whose time was valuable and whose literary opinion carried significant weight in the publishing industry. Her mother found her in the kitchen Saturday morning, printing final copies of her submission materials with the methodical care of someone preparing evidence for a crucial legal case. You seem much happier this week, Susan observed, pouring herself coffee while watching her daughter organize documents. Whatever you've been working on up there has been good for your mood. The comment created an opening for revelation that Kayla wasn't quite ready to walk through. I'm just feeling more focused about my writing goals, she replied carefully. Sometimes taking time to revise existing work is more productive than constantly starting new projects. Her mother's expression suggested she was processing this information through the lens of someone who'd spent decades encouraging practical decision-making over artistic risk-taking. Does this mean you might be considering some of the suggestions we discussed about applying your writing skills to more stable career opportunities? The question revealed how thoroughly her family misunderstood both her creative process and her professional ambitions. They viewed her writing as a transferable skill that could be applied to various employment situations rather than as a calling that required specific kinds of creative expression and artistic freedom. The suggestion that she might redirect her talents toward technical writing or content marketing felt like asking a classical pianist to consider a career playing background music in shopping malls. Mom, I appreciate your concern about my financial future, but what I'm working on right now could be the breakthrough I've been pursuing for the past 2 years. I need you and Dad to trust that I know what I'm doing professionally, even if my approach doesn't follow traditional career patterns. Susan Morrison's expression softened with maternal affection mixed with persistent worry. Sweetheart, we do trust your abilities. We're just concerned about the practical realities of trying to build a career in such a competitive industry. Even talented writers struggle to make consistent livings from their creative work. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering familiar territory about backup plans, realistic timelines, and the importance of financial independence. But throughout the discussion, Kayla felt a new sense of inner certainty that had been absent during previous family conferences about her future. Stephen King's willingness to read her work had validated her artistic choices in a way that no amount of family encouragement could have accomplished. She was no longer defending an abstract dream but protecting a concrete opportunity that could justify years of persistence and sacrifice. On Sunday morning, she drove to the post office to mail her submission package via certified mail, wanting confirmation that her materials had reached their intended destination. The manila envelope containing her first 3 chapters, synopsis, and carefully crafted cover letter felt heavier than its actual weight, loaded with accumulated hopes and fears from 8 years of serious writing pursuit. Standing in line behind families mailing care packages and small business owners shipping merchandise, Kayla felt simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary. To external observers, she was just another person conducting routine postal business on a weekend morning. But internally, she was launching the most important professional communication of her career, sending her creative work to someone whose response could determine whether she continued pursuing publication or finally surrendered to family pressure. About practical career alternatives, the postal clerk processed her certified mail request with bureaucratic efficiency, providing her with a tracking number and receipt that she carefully stored in her wallet alongside Stephen King's business card. These documents represented tangible evidence of her commitment to professional advancement, proof that she was actively pursuing opportunities rather than passively dreaming about future success. The following weeks created a peculiar psychological state where ordinary daily activities occurred against the backdrop of monumental anticipation. She continued applying for freelance writing assignments to contribute to household expenses, maintained her exercise routine and social connections to preserve mental health, and participated in family dinners where conversations carefully avoided the topic of her long-term career prospects. But underlying these normal activities was constant awareness that somewhere in Maine, Stephen King might be reading her work and forming opinions that could transform her entire future. Her phone became a source of both excitement and anxiety, every notification potentially containing the response that would determine her publishing fate. She checked her email obsessively, analyzing spam messages and promotional offers with the desperate hope that King's assistant might have contacted her using an unfamiliar address. The rational part of her brain understood that famous authors received thousands of unsolicited submissions and couldn't be expected to provide immediate responses, but the emotional part of her consciousness interpreted each day of silence as potential evidence that her work had been deemed unworthy of serious consideration. 2 weeks after mailing her submission, Sarah called with news about her own career developments at the publishing house where she worked as an editorial assistant. "I've been thinking about your conference experience," Sarah said during their regular Sunday evening phone conversation. "Have you heard anything back from the people you met there?" The question forced Kayla to confront her decision to keep the King connection secret from even her closest friend. Sarah had been her primary source of emotional support throughout the rejection cycle, celebrating minor victories and providing perspective during moments of despair. Withholding information about potentially the most significant opportunity of her career felt like betraying their friendship, but the superstitious part of her personality worried that discussing the situation would somehow jinx its outcome. "I'm waiting to hear back from a few contacts," she replied carefully. "You know how slowly these industry relationships develop. Everyone's busy with existing projects and client obligations." The half-truth felt uncomfortable but necessary. Until she received some kind of response from King's assistant, she couldn't be certain that her submission had even been received, much less reviewed by its intended recipient. Publishing industry horror stories about lost manuscripts and miscommunicated opportunities had made her paranoid about premature celebrations or public announcements about connections that might evaporate without warning. 3 weeks after mailing her submission, her phone rang at 10:30 on a Tuesday morning with a call from an unknown Maine area code. Kayla stared at the display for 3 rings before answering, her heart pounding with the recognition that this could be the moment that changed everything about her writing career and family relationships. "Hello, is this Kayla Morrison?" The voice belonged to a woman who sounded professional and slightly rushed, as if she were making one of many similar calls during a busy morning. "Yes, this is Kayla. This is Jennifer Walsh, Stephen King's assistant. I'm calling about the manuscript you submitted for his review. Mr. King has finished reading your materials and would like to schedule a phone conversation with you to discuss his thoughts on your work." The words seemed to arrive from a great distance, filtered through layers of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. Stephen King had not only read her submission but wanted to discuss it personally, suggesting that her work had impressed someone whose literary judgment was respected worldwide. "That would be incredible," Kayla managed to say, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. "When would be convenient for him?" "How about Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock Eastern Time? Mr. King prefers phone conversations for these discussions. And he set aside 30 minutes to talk with you about your novel and potential next steps." Kayla confirmed the appointment while mentally calculating how she would explain a crucial phone call scheduled during the time when her father typically worked from his home office and her mother usually conducted her weekly cleaning routine. The last thing she needed was family members overhearing a conversation that could either validate her artistic choices or confirm their suspicions about her impractical career pursuits. After ending the call, she sat in her bedroom for several minutes, staring at the appointment information she'd written in her planner. Thursday at 2 o'clock, she would learn whether 8 years of dedicated writing practice and 43 rejections had been preparation for this moment of professional recognition, or merely expensive practice for an ultimately futile artistic pursuit. Thursday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability, and Kayla found herself pacing the house like a caged animal, unable to concentrate on anything beyond the approaching phone call that could reshape her entire future. She'd barely slept the night before, alternating between imagining triumphant conversations where Stephen King praised her work and devastating scenarios where he gently explained why her novel wasn't ready for publication. The uncertainty was becoming physically painful, manifesting as tension headaches and a nervous stomach that made breakfast impossible. Her parents had both left for their respective daily routines, her father to his accounting office and her mother to volunteer at the local library, leaving Kayla alone in the house with her anticipation and growing anxiety. She deliberately avoided mentioning the scheduled phone call, knowing that her family's well-meaning questions and advice would only amplify her nervousness. This conversation needed to happen in private, without the additional pressure of family members analyzing every word and expression for signs of success or failure. At 1:30, she retreated to her bedroom and closed the door, settling at her desk with a notepad, pen, and glass of water for what could be the most important professional conversation of her life. The room felt simultaneously familiar and foreign, as if the approaching phone call had already begun transforming her relationship to the space where she'd spent countless hours pursuing her literary dreams. In 30 minutes, she would either still be an aspiring writer living with her parents or someone whose work had impressed one of the most successful authors in modern publishing. Her phone rang at exactly 2 o'clock, displaying the same main area code that had delivered news of this opportunity 2 days earlier. She answered on the second ring, her voice hopefully conveying more confidence than she felt. "Kayla, this is Stephen King. Thank you for being available to talk this afternoon." The voice was unmistakably his, the same warm, slightly gravelly tone she'd heard during his keynote address and countless interviews over the years. But hearing it directed specifically at her, speaking her name with familiarity and respect, created a surreal disconnection from reality that made her wonder if she might be experiencing an extremely vivid dream. "Mr. King, thank you so much for taking the time to read my work. This means more to me than I can possibly express." "Well, let's talk about why I wanted to have this conversation," King replied, his tone shifting into what she recognized as his professional mode. "I've now read your full manuscript, not just the 3 chapters you submitted, but the entire novel that my assistant tracked down through your query submissions to various agents." The revelation that he'd sought out and read her complete manuscript suggested a level of interest that exceeded her most optimistic expectations. Publishing professionals didn't invest that kind of time and effort unless they'd discovered something genuinely compelling in an author's work. "I have to tell you, Kayla, The Forgotten Symphony is a remarkable piece of storytelling. Your protagonist Elena is complex and authentic, your understanding of the classical music world is impressive, and your exploration of family expectations versus artistic integrity resonates on multiple levels. This isn't just another coming-of-age novel, it's a sophisticated examination of what it means to choose passion over security in contemporary America." Kayla felt tears of relief and vindication beginning to blur her vision. After months of rejection and family doubt, someone whose opinion carried tremendous weight in the literary world was confirming that her work possessed genuine merit and commercial potential. "More importantly," King continued, "your writing demonstrates the kind of emotional honesty and technical skill that separates professional authors from talented hobbyists. You have a natural ear for dialogue, your pacing keeps readers engaged without sacrificing character development, and your thematic concerns feel both personal and universal. This is publishable work, Kayla. The question isn't whether you have talent, it's how we get your novel in front of the right people at the right time." The conversation continued for nearly 45 minutes, with King offering specific feedback about character arcs, plot structure, and market positioning that revealed the depth of his engagement with her work. He discussed potential publishing strategies, suggested minor revisions that could strengthen the manuscript's commercial appeal, and provided insights into the current literary marketplace that would have been invaluable even without his offer of professional assistance. "Here's what I'd like to propose," King said as their conversation neared its conclusion. "I have relationships with several excellent literary agents who specialize in character-driven commercial fiction. I'm willing to make personal introductions and recommend your work to people who have the experience and industry connections to give The Forgotten Symphony the attention it deserves." This isn't a guarantee of publication, but it's a significant advantage in a competitive marketplace. Kayla's response was immediate and heartfelt. Mr. King, I can't thank you enough for this opportunity. You've given me hope when I was starting to doubt everything about my abilities and career prospects. Don't thank me yet, King replied with a chuckle. Thank me when you're holding your published novel and cashing royalty checks. Right now, we're just getting started on the real work of building your professional writing career. After ending the call, Kayla sat motionless at her desk for several minutes, processing what had just occurred. Stephen King, the Stephen King whose books had inspired her to become a writer, had not only validated her artistic efforts but offered to personally facilitate her entry into the professional publishing world. The impossible had become possible. Through a combination of persistence, craft development, and the kind of serendipitous encounter that seemed to happen only in novels, her immediate impulse was to call Sarah and share the incredible news, but something held her back. The conversation with King had felt so momentous and transformative that discussing it casually seemed somehow inadequate. Instead, she decided to wait until she could process the experience more thoroughly and determine how to present this development. To the various people in her life who had supported or doubted her literary ambitions, her parents returned home that evening to find Kayla unusually energetic and optimistic. Humming while she prepared dinner and responding to their routine inquiries about her day with mysterious references to productive conversations about writing opportunities. Her mood was so dramatically improved from the previous weeks of anxiety that Susan Morrison couldn't help but comment on the transformation. You seem particularly happy tonight, sweetheart. Did something good happen with your writing today? The innocent question created exactly the opening Kayla had been both anticipating and dreading. She'd spent hours considering how to reveal Stephen King's endorsement without seeming to boast or overstate the significance of his assistance. Her family's months of gentle skepticism about her career prospects made her reluctant to appear triumphant, but the magnitude of the day's developments couldn't be minimized or hidden indefinitely. Actually, yes. Something pretty significant happened today, she began, setting down her knife and facing her parents with newfound confidence. Remember that writers' conference in Maine that you thought was an expensive indulgence? Well, it turns out Stephen King was more interested in my work than I initially realized. Her father looked up from the mail he'd been sorting, his expression shifting from casual interest to focused attention. What do you mean by interested in your work? I mean he read my entire novel and spent 45 minutes on the phone today discussing its strengths and commercial potential. He's offered to introduce me to literary agents who specialize in my genre and personally recommend my manuscript to people who have the industry connections to help me find a publisher. The silence that followed was profound and loaded with implications. Richard and Susan Morrison exchanged the kind of meaningful look that had been perfected over 30 years of marriage, processing information that challenged their fundamental assumptions about their daughter's career prospects and decision-making abilities. Stephen King read your book? Susan asked, her voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and dawning realization that perhaps their daughter's artistic pursuits weren't as impractical as they'd assumed. The entire thing. He tracked down my complete manuscript through agent submissions and read all 90,000 words before calling to discuss it. He said it demonstrates professional-level storytelling skills and has genuine commercial potential. Her father's analytical mind immediately began questioning the logistics of what seemed like an impossibly fortunate development. How exactly did this happen? Famous authors don't typically provide personal career assistance to unknown writers they meet briefly at conferences. The skepticism in his tone triggered a defensive response that surprised Kayla with its intensity. For months, she'd absorbed their doubt and concern with patient understanding, recognizing that their pragmatic worldview made her artistic ambitions difficult to comprehend. But Stephen King's validation had fundamentally altered her relationship to their skepticism, transforming it from protective family concern into obstacles to be overcome rather than wisdom to be considered. It happened because I've spent 8 years developing my craft, because I had the courage to invest in professional development opportunities even when they seemed financially impractical, and because I refused to give up despite 43 rejections and constant family pressure to pursue more realistic career options. The words came out more forcefully than she'd intended, carrying accumulated frustration from months of defending her choices against people who loved her but couldn't understand her fundamental nature as a creative person. Her parents' expressions shifted from curiosity to concern as they recognized that this conversation was evolving beyond a simple sharing of good news into something more psychologically complex. Kayla, we've never tried to discourage your writing, Richard said carefully. We've only suggested that you consider backup plans and realistic timelines. Having unrealistic expectations about artistic careers isn't healthy or financially sustainable. Unrealistic expectations? Kayla's voice rose with indignation. Dad, one of the most successful authors in the world just spent 45 minutes telling me that my novel has commercial potential and offering to help me navigate the publishing industry. How is that unrealistic? Her mother attempted to defuse the growing tension with diplomatic language that acknowledged both perspectives. Sweetheart, we're thrilled that this author enjoyed your work. It's wonderful validation of your talent and dedication. We're just concerned about getting your hopes too high based on one conversation, even if it was with someone famous. The comment revealed the fundamental disconnect between her family's protective instincts and her need for unconditional support during what could be the most crucial period of her professional development. They were trying to shield her from potential disappointment by tempering her excitement, but their caution felt like emotional sabotage at exactly the moment when she needed their complete confidence in her abilities. You don't understand, she said, her voice becoming quieter but more intense. This isn't just validation, it's an opportunity that could change everything about my career trajectory. Stephen King doesn't make empty gestures or waste time on writers he doesn't believe in. His endorsement opens doors that have been closed to me for years. Her brother Jake chose that moment to arrive home from work, walking into the kitchen to find his family engaged in what was clearly a tense conversation about topics he'd heard debated numerous times over recent months. His presence immediately shifted the dynamic, adding another perspective to a discussion that had already become more confrontational than anyone had intended. What's everyone arguing about? He asked, loosening his tie while surveying the scene with the weariness of someone who dealt with similar family tensions throughout Kayla's unemployment period. Your sister met Stephen King at that conference, Susan explained, her tone suggesting this information should be received with appropriate skepticism rather than unqualified enthusiasm. He's apparently offered to help her find a literary agent for her novel. Jake's response was immediate and unfortunately predictable. That's cool, sis, but didn't you say you met a bunch of people at that conference? Networking is great, but you can't build a career on one contact, even if he is famous. You still need a sustainable plan for supporting yourself while you're pursuing these opportunities. The rational advice felt like a betrayal from the family member who'd historically been most supportive of her creative aspirations. Jake's transformation from encouraging younger brother to another voice of practical concern represented a fundamental shift in family dynamics that left Kayla feeling increasingly isolated in her artistic pursuits. This isn't networking, she said firmly. This is professional recognition from someone whose opinion carries significant weight in the publishing industry. Stephen King doesn't offer to recommend manuscripts unless he believes they have genuine merit and commercial potential. Her father leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter with the expression he typically reserved for complex financial analysis. Kayla, I hope you understand that even if this author's assistance leads to agent representation, publishing is still an extremely competitive business with no guarantees of success. You can't count on this one contact to solve all your career challenges. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with her family expressing cautious optimism tempered by concerns about realistic expectations and financial planning. Their inability to simply celebrate her achievement without immediately pivoting to worry and contingency planning felt like emotional punishment for succeeding in ways they couldn't fully comprehend or support. As she retreated to her bedroom that evening, Kayla realized that Stephen King's endorsement had created an unexpected problem. Instead of resolving family tensions about her career prospects, his validation had intensified the fundamental conflict between her artistic ambitions and their pragmatic worldview. They couldn't celebrate her success because they didn't fully believe in its significance, and she couldn't minimize its importance without betraying her own professional development. The phone call with King had transformed her from someone seeking family approval into someone who no longer needed their validation to pursue her chosen career path. But that psychological independence came with the painful recognition that her relationship with her family might never accommodate her identity as a professional writer, regardless of whatever external success she might eventually achieve. That night, she finally called Sarah to share the day's developments, needing to connect with someone who could appreciate the magnitude of what had occurred without immediately pivoting to concerns about backup plans and realistic timelines. Kayla, this is incredible. Sarah's enthusiasm provided the unqualified celebration that had been missing from her family's response. Stephen King's endorsement is like winning the lottery for aspiring authors. This changes everything about your publishing prospects. I know, Kayla replied, her voice reflecting both excitement and exhaustion from the day's emotional complexity. But my family is treating it like it's just another networking contact instead of recognizing what a game changer this could be for my entire career. That's because they don't understand the publishing industry, Sarah said firmly. They're thinking like people who work in fields where success follows predictable patterns. Literary careers are built on exactly these kinds of breakthrough moments where the right person recognizes your talent at the right time. The conversation with Sarah restored some of Kayla's confidence in the significance of King's endorsement, but it also highlighted the growing divide between her family's expectations and her artistic reality. She was no longer just an unemployed daughter living at home while pursuing impractical dreams. She was a writer whose work had impressed one of the most successful authors in the world, someone whose career was about to enter an entirely new phase of professional development. The question was whether her family would ever be able to see her transformation, or if they would continue viewing her artistic pursuits through the lens of practical concern that had defined their relationship. Throughout her unemployment period, Stephen King's validation had given her the confidence to pursue her writing career regardless of external approval, but it couldn't resolve the fundamental tension between her identity as an artist and her family's need for her to conform to more conventional definitions of success and security. Stephen King's introduction to literary agent Margaret Chen arrived via email 3 days after their phone conversation, and within a week, Kayla found herself navigating the most promising professional opportunity of her writing career. Chen, who represented several best-selling authors in the literary fiction space, had agreed to read The Forgotten Symphony, based solely on King's recommendation, a level of industry access that typically took years to achieve through traditional submission channels. The manuscript review process that followed was unlike anything Kayla had experienced during her months of agent querying. Instead of form rejections or weeks of silence, Chen provided detailed feedback within 10 days, requesting a full revision that addressed specific structural concerns and market positioning strategies. The revision notes were extensive and challenging, requiring Kayla to reconsider fundamental aspects of her protagonist's character arc and the novel's thematic focus. But just as this incredible opportunity was gaining momentum, Richard Morrison received news that would test every assumption his family had made about financial security, practical career choices, and the value of artistic pursuits. His accounting firm, Miller & Associates, where he'd worked for 30 years and built his reputation as a reliable financial professional, was being acquired by a larger corporate entity that planned to eliminate redundant positions and restructure operations to maximize efficiency. The announcement came during a mandatory staff meeting on a Tuesday morning in November, delivered by executives who used corporate euphemisms to describe what everyone understood was large-scale layoffs disguised as strategic reorganization. Richard, at 58 years old with a daughter living at home and significant mortgage obligations, suddenly faced the terrifying prospect of unemployment in an economy that had become increasingly hostile to older workers seeking new positions. That evening, the Morrison family dinner table became the site of a crisis management session that would fundamentally alter their relationships and priorities. Richard's normally steady demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled anxiety as he explained the firm's acquisition timeline and his uncertain employment prospects. The man who'd spent years advocating for practical career choices and financial stability now found himself confronting the same professional uncertainty he'd warned his daughter against. The acquisition will be complete by January 1st, he explained, his voice carrying a weariness that Kayla had never heard before. They're keeping maybe 40% of the current staff, and seniority doesn't guarantee anything when they're focused on cost reduction and modernization. Susan Morrison's response reflected the kind of pragmatic problem-solving approach that had characterized her family's decision-making for decades. We need to immediately cut all unnecessary expenses and start applying for positions at other accounting firms in the area. Your experience and client relationships should make you competitive for similar roles. But Jake's analysis was more sobering, informed by his own experience in the insurance industry where corporate consolidations had become routine business practices. Dad, the entire accounting profession is consolidating. The firms that are hiring want younger employees with lower salary expectations and more flexibility about relocation. You're facing age discrimination whether companies admit it or not. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, covering topics that had previously existed only in the abstract realm of other families' problems: unemployment benefits, health insurance continuity, mortgage payment deferrals, and the psychological challenges of job searching after decades of career stability. For the first time in her adult life, Kayla watched her parents grapple with the kind of professional uncertainty that had defined her own experience for months. Emma, who'd been quietly calculating numbers on her phone throughout the discussion, finally spoke up with characteristic directness. If Dad can't find comparable employment within 6 months, you'll need to consider selling the house. The mortgage payments alone will drain your savings, and you can't count on unemployment benefits lasting indefinitely. The suggestion hung in the air like a death sentence for everything the Morrison family had built over 3 decades. The house wasn't just a financial asset, it was the physical foundation of their identity, the place where they'd raised their children and accumulated the memories that defined their collective history. The possibility of losing it transformed abstract economic concerns into existential threats to their family's stability. It was during this moment of crisis that Kayla experienced a profound shift in perspective about her own career choices and family relationships. While her parents and siblings discussed contingency plans and worst-case scenarios, she realized that the financial security they'd always prioritized had proven to be as illusory as the artistic dreams they'd discouraged her from pursuing. Her father's decades of loyal service and practical decision-making hadn't protected him from corporate indifference any more than her months of rejection had protected her from continued literary pursuit. "Wait," she said, interrupting a discussion about potential relocation to cities with better job markets for accounting professionals. "Before we start talking about selling the house and moving away from everything familiar, let me tell you what's been happening with my writing career." Her family's attention shifted to her with expressions that mixed curiosity with skepticism, as if wondering how her artistic pursuits could possibly be relevant to their current financial crisis. But Kayla had spent the past week receiving updates from Margaret Chen about publisher interest in The Forgotten Symphony that had exceeded even Stephen King's optimistic predictions about the novel's commercial potential. "Margaret Chen, the literary agent Stephen King connected me with, has been submitting my novel to publishers for the past 2 weeks. Yesterday, she called to tell me that we've received 3 offers, including one from a major publishing house. That's proposing a 2-book deal with a significant advance." The silence that followed was different from the skeptical quiet that had greeted her previous announcements about writing developments. This was the stunned recognition that their impractical daughter's artistic pursuits had somehow generated the kind of financial opportunity that could address their family's crisis in ways that conventional employment couldn't match. "How significant is significant?" Richard asked, his voice carrying hope tempered by decades of professional caution about deals that seemed too good to be true. Kayla took a deep breath before revealing numbers that would reshape her family's understanding of both her career prospects and the commercial value of creative work. "The advance for both books is $250,000, with additional royalty potential based on sales performance. Margaret thinks we can negotiate even better terms given the competitive interest from multiple publishers." Emma's immediate response was to grab her phone and begin calculating the financial implications with the efficiency of someone accustomed to analyzing investment opportunities. "That's more money than Dad makes in 4 years at the accounting firm. Even after agent commissions and taxes, it's enough to cover the mortgage payments for several years while he's looking for new employment." The revelation transformed the family's crisis management session into something approaching celebration, as her parents and siblings began processing the implications of Kayla's success for their collective financial security. But the irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The family member whose career choices had been consistently criticized for their impracticality had suddenly become their most promising source of financial stability. Richard Morrison's expression revealed the psychological complexity of a man whose fundamental beliefs about work, security, and success were being challenged by circumstances beyond his control. His daughter's artistic achievement represented everything he'd spent years discouraging, yet it now offered salvation from the professional disaster that had befallen his own practical career choices. "Kayla," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion that combined pride, gratitude, and perhaps embarrassment about his previous skepticism. "I owe you an apology. We all do. We've been so focused on conventional definitions of security that we couldn't see the value of what you were building through your writing." The apology felt both validating and bittersweet, arriving only after external circumstances had forced her family to recognize what she'd been trying to prove for years, that artistic careers, while unconventional, could provide financial rewards and professional satisfaction that exceeded traditional employment opportunities. Stephen King's endorsement had opened doors, but her talent and persistence had created work worthy of commercial success. Susan Morrison, who'd spent months worried about her daughter's financial future, now found herself contemplating a reality where Kayla's artistic income could subsidize the family's expenses during Richard's career transition. "What happens next with the publishing process? When would you actually receive this advance money?" Margaret Chen had explained the timeline during their most recent phone conversation, and Kayla shared the details with her family's rapt attention. "The contract negotiation should be completed within 2 weeks. I'll receive half the advance upon signing, and the remaining half when I deliver the completed second novel. The first book is scheduled for publication next fall, assuming final revisions are completed on schedule." Jake's insurance industry experience had taught him to look for potential complications in seemingly straightforward financial arrangements. "What about taxes? And what if the books don't sell well enough to earn back the advance? Are you personally liable for repaying money if the publisher loses their investment?" The questions demonstrated his genuine concern for his sister's financial protection, a dramatic shift from his previous focus on her lack of steady employment. Kayla was able to address his concerns with information Margaret Chen had provided about standard publishing contracts, advances as non-refundable investments, and tax strategies for managing irregular creative income. As the evening progressed, the family's conversation evolved from crisis management to celebration planning, with everyone contributing ideas about how to maximize the opportunities created by Kayla's publishing success. Emma suggested investment strategies for managing the advance money, Jake offered to help research tax implications and financial planning services, and their parents began discussing how Richard's career transition could be managed with reduced financial pressure. But the most significant transformation was in Richard's relationship to his daughter's artistic ambitions. The man who'd spent years encouraging practical career choices and expressing skepticism about creative pursuits now found himself asking detailed questions about the publishing industry, book marketing strategies, and long-term prospects for building a sustainable writing career. "I realize now that I was measuring your success against my own experience in a traditional profession," he admitted during a private conversation with Kayla after her siblings had left for their respective homes. "I couldn't understand that. Creative careers follow different patterns and timelines than accounting or insurance or real estate." The admission represented more than just parental recognition of professional achievement, it was acknowledgement that Kayla's fundamental nature as an artist had been valid all along, that her refusal to conform to conventional career expectations had been wisdom rather than stubbornness. Stephen King's endorsement had provided external validation, but her family's crisis had created the context for them to recognize that artistic success could provide security in ways that traditional employment increasingly couldn't guarantee. Over the following days, as Margaret Chen negotiated contract terms and Richard began the emotionally challenging process of job searching at 58, the Morrison family dynamics continued evolving in response to their dramatically altered circumstances. Kayla's transition from unemployed daughter to family breadwinner created both opportunities and challenges that none of them had anticipated when she'd first announced her intention to pursue writing as a full-time career. The house that had once felt like a prison of family expectations and disappointed dreams now represented a creative sanctuary where Kayla could write her second novel while contributing to her family's financial stability during their transition period. Her childhood bedroom, where she'd spent countless hours defending her artistic ambitions, had become the headquarters of a professional writing career that was exceeding everyone's expectations for both creative fulfillment and commercial success. But success brought new pressures and responsibilities that tested her emotional resilience in ways that rejection and family skepticism never had. The weight of being her family's financial hope during her father's unemployment created anxiety about maintaining her creative productivity while managing the practical obligations of her new role as a contributing household member. The crisis that had threatened to destroy her family's financial security had ultimately validated every choice she'd made in pursuit of her artistic dreams. But it had also revealed that success in creative fields could be just as psychologically complex and emotionally demanding as the years of struggle that preceded professional recognition. The contract signing took place on a snowy December morning in Margaret Chen's Manhattan office, with Kayla sitting across from representatives of Meridian Publishing House as they finalized what would become the most transformative document of her professional life. The conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Hudson River, creating a backdrop that felt appropriately cinematic for what Margaret had described as one of the most competitive bidding wars I've seen for a debut literary novel in years. The final advance had increased to $325,000 after multiple publishers had engaged in escalating offers, each recognizing the commercial potential that Stephen King had identified months earlier. But beyond the financial significance, the contract represented validation from an industry that had previously seemed impenetrable to someone without traditional credentials or insider connections. As Kayla signed each page of the multi-page agreement, she thought about the journey that had led to this moment. The 43 rejections that had preceded Stephen King's endorsement, the family dinners where her career choices had been questioned, and the conference in Maine where she'd invested money she couldn't afford in what had seemed like a desperate attempt to jumpstart her stagnant writing career. For Margaret Chen had become more than just her literary agent during the contract negotiation process. She'd evolved into a mentor who understood both the creative and commercial aspects of building a sustainable writing career. Her experience guiding authors through the psychological challenges of sudden success had prepared her to help Kayla navigate the transition from aspiring writer to published novelist with realistic expectations about both opportunities and obligations. "This is just the beginning," Margaret explained as they left the publisher's office together. The advance is wonderful, but your long-term career success will depend on how readers respond to your work and how effectively we can build your author platform over the next few years. Publishing success requires the same persistence and craft development that got you to this point. The advice resonated with lessons Kayla had learned from Stephen King's keynote address about the importance of focusing on the work itself rather than getting distracted by industry recognition or financial rewards. But the practical reality of her family's financial crisis meant she couldn't afford the luxury of treating her publishing success as purely artistic validation. It had become an economic lifeline that carried responsibilities beyond her personal creative fulfillment. The drive back to Cleveland gave her time to process the magnitude of what had just occurred and prepare for conversations with family members who were eagerly awaiting news about contract finalization. Her phone had been buzzing with text messages throughout the day, including updates from her father about his job search progress and encouraging notes from Emma and Jake, who were beginning to view their sister's artistic career as a legitimate source of family pride rather than a concerning deviation from practical decision-making. But it was Sarah's message that provided the emotional context Kayla needed to fully appreciate her achievement. I've been working in publishing for 3 years, and I've never seen a debut author generate this kind of industry excitement. You've accomplished something truly extraordinary, and I hope you take time to celebrate before diving into the next phase of work. The reminder to celebrate felt important because Kayla's natural tendency was to immediately begin worrying about delivering the second novel on schedule and meeting the commercial expectations that her advance had created. The perfectionist mindset that had sustained her through years of rejection was now creating pressure about maintaining success rather than enjoying the moment when her impossible dreams had finally materialized. Her homecoming that evening felt like a victory parade, with her parents and siblings gathering in the kitchen where so many difficult conversations about her career prospects had taken place over recent months. The same dining room table that had witnessed debates about realistic timelines and backup plans now served as the setting for champagne toasts and discussions about how Kayla's success would impact everyone's immediate plans. Richard Morrison, who'd spent weeks applying for accounting positions while managing his anxiety about age discrimination and industry consolidation, was visibly transformed by the relief of knowing that his daughter's income could sustain the family during his career transition. The man who'd built his identity around providing financial stability for his family had been forced to confront the possibility that his decades of loyal service might not protect him from economic displacement. I've been thinking about what you said weeks ago, about following your passion instead of just pursuing security, he told Kayla during a private moment after the family celebration had wound down. Maybe this forced career change is an opportunity for me to consider work that provides more personal satisfaction, even if it doesn't match my previous salary level. The comment represented a fundamental shift in his worldview, from viewing work purely as economic necessity to recognizing that professional fulfillment might be worth financial sacrifice. Kayla's success had provided him with the psychological permission to consider career options that prioritized meaning over maximum income, possibilities that had been unthinkable when family financial security depended entirely on his accounting practice earnings. Susan Morrison's transformation was equally profound but expressed differently. Her months of worry about her daughter's impractical career choices had been replaced by curiosity about the creative process and genuine interest in understanding how artistic work could generate both personal fulfillment and financial rewards. She'd begun reading literary fiction with new appreciation, recognizing that the novels she'd previously viewed as entertainment were actually sophisticated creative products that required years of skill development to produce. I want to read everything you've written, she told Kayla while helping clean up after their celebration dinner. Not just because you're my daughter, but because I'm beginning to understand that what you do requires talents and knowledge that I never fully appreciated. I'd like to understand your work the way you understand it. The request felt like recognition that Kayla's artistic identity was legitimate and valuable, not just a phase to be tolerated until she developed more practical interests. Her mother's desire to engage with her creative work represented the kind of family support she'd craved for years but had learned to live without during the darkest periods of her writing career. Jake and Emma's responses reflected their own professional experiences and personality differences, but both had begun viewing their sister's success as inspiration for reconsidering their own career priorities. Jake admitted that his insurance work, while financially rewarding, provided little personal satisfaction beyond steady paychecks and benefits. Emma's real estate career was thriving financially, but she'd begun questioning whether accumulating investment properties was providing the kind of meaningful work experience she wanted to prioritize in her 30s. You've shown us that it's possible to build a career around something you're genuinely passionate about, Emma said during their sibling conversation that extended well past midnight. I've been so focused on maximizing income that I never considered whether I actually enjoy the work I'm doing. Maybe success should be measured by more than just financial accumulation. The philosophical discussions that emerged from Kayla's publishing success created new depth in family relationships that had previously focused primarily on practical concerns and surface-level social interactions. Her artistic achievement had given everyone permission to examine their own choices more critically and consider whether they were living according to their authentic values or simply following conventional expectations about career development and financial planning. But the most unexpected development was a phone call that arrived 3 days after the contract signing, from Stephen King himself, congratulating Kayla on her publishing deal and offering additional guidance about managing the transition from aspiring writer to professional author. "The advance is wonderful, but don't let the money distract you from the real work," he advised during their conversation. Publishing success creates new pressures that can interfere with creative productivity if you're not careful about maintaining focus on storytelling rather than getting caught up in industry politics and marketing obligations. His counsel about protecting creative time and energy felt particularly relevant given the increased family responsibilities that had accompanied her financial success. Everyone wanted to discuss her career developments, interview her about the publishing process, and seek advice about their own professional decisions. The attention was gratifying but also potentially overwhelming for someone who needed sustained concentration to complete her second novel on schedule. King also shared insights about managing family relationships during career transitions that demonstrated his understanding of the psychological complexities that accompanied sudden professional recognition. "Success can change family dynamics in ways that are both positive and challenging," he explained. "People who've been skeptical about your choices suddenly want to be involved in your career decisions, which can be wonderful but also intrusive if you're not careful about maintaining boundaries." The advice proved prescient as Kayla began experiencing subtle pressure from family members who wanted to contribute to her publishing career in ways that reflected their own professional expertise. Her father offered to manage her financial planning and tax preparation, Emma suggested real estate investment strategies for her advance money, and Jake proposed insurance policies that would protect her income potential. Their eagerness to help was touching but also potentially problematic if it interfered with her need to focus on creative work rather than business management. Margaret Chen had warned her about exactly these kinds of complications during their post-signing lunch. In Manhattan, family members often struggle to understand that creative careers require different kinds of support than traditional businesses, she'd explained. They want to help using skills that worked in their own professions, but writers need protection of time and mental energy more than business advice or financial optimization strategies. The challenge was accepting family support without allowing it to transform her creative work into a collaborative family enterprise that might compromise her artistic independence. Kayla's years of defending her career choices against family skepticism had prepared her to resist criticism but not to manage the potentially more complex dynamics of family members who wanted to participate in her success. Over the following weeks, as she began working on revisions to her second novel while managing the publicity obligations associated with her debut book's upcoming release, Kayla developed new appreciation for Stephen King's warning about the distractions that could accompany publishing success. The advance money had solved her family's immediate financial crisis, but it had also created expectations about productivity and commercial performance that added pressure to her creative process. The transformation from aspiring writer to published author had fulfilled her lifelong professional dreams while creating entirely new categories of challenges and responsibilities. Success, she was discovering, required different skills and psychological strategies than the persistence and craft development that had sustained her through years of rejection and family doubt. But as she sat in her childhood bedroom, now converted into a professional writing office where she could work on her second novel while contributing to her family's financial stability, Kayla felt profound gratitude for the journey that had led her to this point. Stephen King's endorsement had opened doors, but her own talent and persistence had created work worthy of commercial success and family recognition. The girl who'd been told to stop wasting time writing had become the family's primary breadwinner through the very artistic pursuits they'd once discouraged. It was vindication beyond her wildest dreams, but it was also the beginning of new challenges that would test her ability to maintain creative authenticity while managing the practical and emotional complexities of professional success. 2 years later, Kayla Morrison stood at the podium of the same Highland Writers' Conference where she'd first met Stephen King, but now as the featured guest speaker addressing an audience of aspiring authors who looked remarkably similar to the person she'd been during that transformative weekend in Maine. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who'd once borrowed money she couldn't afford to attend this conference was now being paid a substantial speaking fee to share her journey from rejection to literary success. The Forgotten Symphony had exceeded every commercial expectation, spending 12 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and generating international translation deals that had expanded her readership far beyond the domestic market Margaret Chan had initially targeted. The novel's exploration of artistic ambition versus family expectations had resonated with readers worldwide, creating a global conversation about the challenges of pursuing creative careers in societies that prioritized financial security over personal fulfillment. But perhaps more significantly, the book had established Kayla as a literary voice whose work addressed universal themes through authentic storytelling that connected with both critics and general readers. The reviews had been overwhelmingly positive, with several prominent literary magazines comparing her debut to works by established authors whose careers she'd studied and admired throughout her development as a writer. Her second novel, Harmonies of Home, had been completed 6 months ahead of schedule and was generating even more publisher excitement than her debut had received. The manuscript explored similar themes through the story of a jazz pianist returning to her hometown after achieving international success, only to discover that fame hadn't resolved the fundamental tensions between artistic identity and family relationships that had driven her away years earlier. The advance for her third and fourth books had reached 7 figures, a number that still felt surreal when Margaret Chan discussed it during their regular strategy meetings about long-term career planning and platform development. But beyond the financial success, Kayla had discovered that professional recognition as an author provided the kind of personal satisfaction she dreamed about during those late nights of writing while working at the diner and living with her parents. Her family's transformation had been equally dramatic. Richard Morrison had used his enforced career transition as an opportunity to launch his own accounting consultancy focused on helping artists and creative professionals manage their finances, a specialization that drew on both his traditional expertise and his newfound understanding of irregular creative income patterns. His client base had grown steadily through referrals from Kayla's literary contacts, creating a successful second career chapter that provided more personal satisfaction than his previous corporate employment had ever offered. "I never thought I'd be grateful for getting laid off at 58, he'd admitted during one of their regular coffee conversations, which had evolved from tense family conferences about impractical career choices into collaborative discussions about professional development and artistic integrity. But losing that job forced me to reconsider what I actually wanted from work, instead of just accepting whatever seemed most financially secure." Susan Morrison had channeled her newfound appreciation for creative work into volunteering with local literacy programs and serving on the board of a nonprofit organization that provided writing workshops for underserved communities. Her transformation from skeptical parent to arts advocate had surprised everyone, including herself, but reflected a genuine desire to understand and support the kind of creative development she now recognized as valuable both personally and professionally. "I spent so many years worried about practical careers that I never considered how much fulfillment comes from work that connects with your deeper interests and values," she'd explained while helping Kayla organize her home office. "Watching you build a career around something you're genuinely passionate about has made me want to contribute to that kind of success for other people." Emma and Jake had both made significant career changes inspired by their sister's example of prioritizing authenticity over conventional definitions of success. Emma had transitioned from real estate investment to historic property restoration, combining her business skills with newfound interest in architectural preservation and community development. Jake had left the insurance industry to become a financial advisor specializing in helping families navigate career transitions and unconventional income patterns, drawing on his own family's experience with economic uncertainty and creative career development. The siblings' quarterly family dinners had evolved into celebrations of everyone's professional growth and personal satisfaction rather than status competitions about income levels and traditional markers of success. Their conversations now focused on meaningful work experiences, creative projects, and ways to support each other's continued development rather than simply comparing financial achievements or conventional career advancement. But the most profound change had been in how the family discussed risk, security, and the value of pursuing work that provided personal fulfillment alongside financial rewards. The crisis that had threatened their stability had ultimately taught them that traditional employment couldn't guarantee security any more than artistic careers guaranteed poverty. Kayla's success had demonstrated that creative work could provide both meaningful engagement and substantial financial rewards for people willing to develop their skills and persist through inevitable challenges. Standing before the Highland Writers' Conference audience, Kayla could see her own former self reflected in the faces of aspiring authors who'd invested limited resources in attending workshops and networking events while hoping for breakthrough opportunities that seemed impossibly remote. She remembered the desperation and determination that had motivated her to approach Stephen King's signing table with her worn paperback copy of On Writing and her 43 rejection letters as credentials. The most important thing I learned during my years of rejection wasn't about craft development or market research, she told the audience during her keynote address. It was about maintaining faith in your own creative vision while remaining open to feedback and opportunities that might come from unexpected sources. Success in creative fields requires both stubborn persistence and flexible adaptation to circumstances beyond your control. She shared specific details about her journey from family skepticism to commercial success, emphasizing the role that both talent development and serendipitous encounters had played in her publishing breakthrough. But she also discussed the challenges that had accompanied success, managing family expectations, maintaining creative authenticity under commercial pressure, and developing professional skills that weren't typically taught in creative writing programs. Stephen King's endorsement opened doors, but it didn't write my books or handle the business aspects of building a sustainable career, she explained. His support was invaluable, but it was just one element in a much longer process of skill development, persistence through rejection, and learning to balance artistic integrity with commercial viability. During the question and answer session, a young woman in the back row raised her hand with the tentative confidence Kayla remembered from her own conference experiences. My family thinks writing is just an expensive hobby that's preventing me from building a real career. How do you deal with people who love you but don't understand your artistic ambitions? The question created an immediate emotional connection between Kayla and her younger self, remembering those painful family dinners, where her career choices had been questioned with loving concern that felt like emotional sabotage. Her response drew on years of experience navigating family relationships while maintaining commitment to creative work that others couldn't fully comprehend or support. The most difficult aspect of pursuing creative careers isn't rejection from publishers or agents, Kayla replied. It's maintaining faith in your artistic vision when people who love you express doubt about your choices. Family skepticism often comes from genuine concern about financial security and practical challenges, but it can be psychologically devastating when you need emotional support most. She continued by sharing strategies she'd developed for managing family relationships while protecting her creative energy and professional focus. I learned to separate my need for family approval from my commitment to artistic development. Their love and support were important to me, but I couldn't allow their practical concerns to override my own understanding of what I needed to do professionally. The conversation with the audience extended well beyond the scheduled time, covering topics from craft development to platform building to managing the psychological challenges of creative careers in cultures that often prioritized financial security over personal fulfillment. Many of the questions reflected struggles Kayla had experienced during her own development as a writer, and she found genuine satisfaction in providing guidance that might help others navigate similar challenges more effectively. After the formal presentation concluded, she was approached by numerous aspiring authors seeking more specific advice about their individual circumstances. Each conversation reminded her of the isolation and uncertainty she'd experienced during her years of rejection and family doubt, when connecting with successful authors had seemed impossible despite attending conferences and workshops. One particularly memorable interaction involved a middle-aged man whose family had been pressuring him to abandon his novel-writing pursuits in favor of more practical uses of his free time. His situation was remarkably similar to what Kayla had experienced, and she found herself offering the kind of encouragement and practical guidance she desperately needed during her darkest moments of self-doubt. Keep writing, keep submitting, and keep believing in your work, she told him. Success in creative fields rarely follows predictable timelines, but persistence and craft development eventually create opportunities that can transform everything about your career prospects and family relationships. As she drove home from the conference, Kayla reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that first encounter with Stephen King at the same event 2 years earlier. The struggling aspiring author who'd borrowed money to attend workshops had become someone whose work influenced and inspired other writers pursuing similar dreams of creative professional fulfillment. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah, who'd been promoted to senior editor and was now acquiring manuscripts for her publishing house. Saw the video of your keynote online. You've become the kind of author whose advice I would have desperately needed when we were both starting out. So proud of how far you've come. The message encapsulated something important about success in creative fields. It wasn't just about individual achievement, but about contributing to a community of artists who supported each other through the challenges of building careers around work that mattered personally and professionally. Kayla's journey from rejection to recognition had positioned her to help others navigate similar paths with better guidance and more realistic expectations about both opportunities and obstacles. That evening, she joined her family for their regular Sunday dinner, where conversations now focused on creative projects, meaningful work experiences, and ways to support each other's continued growth rather than concerns about practical career choices and financial security. The transformation had been gradual but profound, reshaping not only individual career paths but fundamental family values about what constituted successful and fulfilling adult lives. As she looked around the table at her parents and siblings, all of whom had been changed by her artistic success and their shared experience of economic uncertainty, Kayla felt profound gratitude for the journey that had led them to this point. The family that had once discouraged her writing as impractical had become her strongest supporters and advocates, understanding finally that creative careers could provide both personal satisfaction and financial security for people willing to develop their talents and persist through inevitable challenges. The woman who'd been told to stop wasting time writing had proved that artistic pursuits could be among the most practical career choices available to people with the courage to pursue their authentic interests and develop professional skills around their creative passions. Success had taken longer than she'd hoped and required more persistence than she'd anticipated, but it had ultimately validated every choice she'd made in pursuit of becoming the writer she'd always known she could be. Her story had become proof that dreams deferred aren't necessarily dreams denied, that family relationships can evolve to support rather than constrain artistic development, and that sometimes the most impractical choices lead to the most rewarding professional outcomes for people brave enough to trust their own creative vision over conventional wisdom about career development and financial planning. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And, hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.